Tres series de televisión nos tramaron particularmente durante nuestra infancia: Escalofríos, Le temes a la oscuridad y Freaky Stories, la que conocimos como cortos de Cartoon Network, que empezaban con ese "esto es una historia real, le pasó al amigo de un amigo", que originalmente era una serie de media hora que tenía presentadores, pero que aquí conocimos como distintos segmentos que iban pasando en Cartoon Network. Hablé con Steve Schneer, el creador de esta serie que me traumó a mí y supongo que a muchos de ustedes, sobre cómo fue que surgió y cómo fue que se pensó cada uno de esos cortos.
We now return to Mira Akien and Contre with our latest interview.
Freaky Stories, in my mind, was Twilight Zone for kids. Okay, it was always the huge influence in my life.
Esta es una historia real. Le sucedió al amigo de un amigo hace 3 años cuando estábamos en la secundaria.
I was looking for an idea for a TV show. And what I wanted to do was originally fairy tales, but Disney had all the good ones, right? So I started looking at fairy tales from around the world, and they were all violent, like crazy nuts stories. So I you know, and do I want to be authentic to the fairy tales, or do I want to sanitize them for television? I want to be authentic to stories, so I couldn't do fairy tales. And then I thought, is there a modern fairy tale? And the modern fairy tales are urban legends, and they serve the same purpose as a fairy tale. Like a fairy tale, parents back 500 years ago would say to their children, don't go in the woods because there's probably a sex killer in the woods, right? But if you tell them, you don't want to explain sex killer to your kids, so they say there's a witch, right? Don't go in the woods, there's a witch. It's the same psychology, but it's updated 500 years. I wrote down a bunch of them and came up with, instead of Once Upon a Time, this is a true story, it happened to a friend of mine. That's Once Upon a Time.
Esta es una historia real. Le sucedió al amigo de un amigo.
From the time I started to the time it got on the air was 10 years. Very, very long time. I wrote a bunch of stuff, and then I made a very low-budget 5-minute movie with an urban legend. And I took it, I had no knowledge of the broadcasters. I was literally knocking on the doors, and YTV in Canada was the third broadcaster that I came to. And it took a few weeks, but they eventually said yes. And so I had a development deal, but then I had to raise the money to make it. And I know nothing about raising money. So that took about 4 years, and finally, right when they had finally said enough, thank you, Steve, goodbye, at the very last second, I met John Dalmage. In the opening credits, it says Steve Schneer and John Dalmage. I met John, and John was able to put it together financially. Have you seen the episode where it's not fully animated, and there's the hook, there's spiders in the hairdo, and they sort of move like that?
Dentro del panal de abejas del Cindy había arañas. Cientos de arañas negras, grandes, feas.
So what we did is I invited artists to here's the script, and you realize it in your own artistic style. And that's how I wanted the whole series to be, where I would have artists from all over the world and give them the script, and they give me the artwork, and we film it. And we did the pilot episode, which was four stories. YTV picked it up, but then for the actual mechanics of doing the show, we couldn't do it that way. It's too ponderous. So we went with traditional Saturday morning animation. And basically, there was one designer at Funbag Studios in Ottawa. His name is Phil Postma, Postma, and he's brilliant. And he came up with all the designs.
Y ella bajó a mirar. Pero cuando abrió la puerta, escuchó un ruido a metal. Miró la puerta del auto y ¿saben qué encontró?
Where did you draw the line in terms of how much you can scare a kid?
This was great. At the first meeting at YTV, they had the executive who bought the show was an older man named Merv Stone, who has sadly passed away. And Merv said, "You can do anything you want, except we have to show it to families during the dinner hour." Right? If you can do that, you can do whatever you want. And I thought, and that was the deal. That was the deal that we had, and I remember fighting with people because there was stuff that was coming in much too violent, much too sexist, much too gory, and it would be, even though that man was no longer there, we have to show it to families during the dinner hour. Sometimes I'd get something from the director, right, which was not what I had in mind. And before I'd phone him up and yell at him or something, I'd look at it and I'd say, there was one director in particular, what does he mean by that? And I'd look at it, right? And then the next day I'd come back, I'd look at it again, and then maybe I'd phone and I'd say, "What do you mean by this?" And he'd explain it. I'd say, "Okay, I didn't get it the first time." And I think of the 140 stories we did, maybe I asked for one change, because it was always a collaboration. And I trusted these people, and they never failed me.
La máquina de Julie reciclaba los gusanos de su basura y los convertía en dulces.
We ran out of urban legends very quickly. So what happened? We had an executive story editor named Simon Muntner, who has again sadly passed away. And Simon was a wonderful man. He was great. And every Tuesday afternoon at lunchtime, there was a restaurant, and we would all meet at the back of the restaurant. And everybody in the TV business knew that we were meeting there. And it was a Chinese restaurant, and people would come in and take a seat. And we were buying lunch for everybody. And, have a bowl of soup and tell us a story. And we were just sitting around and laughing. It would be all afternoon. And then it would be, "Okay, Bob, you write that story. You write this," and if you told the story and if it was good, that's where the stories came from. And a lot of the stories, I wrote about a third of the series. And a lot of the stories are about me and my sisters when we were young.
Le temes a la oscuridad.
Está a punto de llevarse un susto. Escalofríos.
Goosebumps, Are You Afraid of the Dark? And I think these two things and freaky stories, in essence, are the same. Are like
they are. And they were all made in Toronto at the same time, and we did get together over coffee.
And did you exchange stories? Like, okay, I can do this one. Okay, and
no, we never did. But it was a social thing where we did meet. Hello, how are you? I enjoy your show.
La chica era una robacuerpos. Le robó el cuerpo para vender sus órganos y lo dejó vivo.
I don't think a month goes by, or maybe 2 weeks don't go by, where somebody like you reaches out to me and says, "Whoa, that was great," and it feels really nice.
Are you thinking of a comeback or like maybe more episodes? Is it possible to think? Never.
The show started airing 25 years ago. It ended 22 years ago. The crew that I worked with are retired or dead. The distributors are not nice people, and they don't care. And they never paid me. No, honestly. Yeah, really. There were a lot of people they just never paid. and it's $1 billion company, and you can't they're going to tie me up in court for 10 years. So, yeah. But we were never paid.
Esta es una historia real. Le sucedió al amigo de un amigo, Norberto.